For our next session, I'd like to welcome on stage Leah Daughtry, Principal of On These Things, LLC, and Mary Robinson, former President of Ireland and Chair of the Elders, for the conversation with a leader, Mary Robinson. Please welcome them now on stage.
Good afternoon, sisters and brothers. It's good to see you all. I am thrilled to be in conversation today with President Mary Robinson. We've been backstage and I've been trying not to fangirl too much. But I have more questions than I have time. And so I want to dive right in, if I may. You have a new book. It's in the bookstore, go buy the book. It's called Climate Justice, a Man-Made Problem with a Feminist Solution. And so I want to dive into that title, which is interesting and provocative. And I want to start with climate justice. Not a lot of people tie those two things together. We all know that climate is changing. Yeah. But it's often disconnected from issues of justice. Why do you tie those together?
Climate justice starts with the injustice. And over time, I've kind of worked out there are at least 5 layers, if you like, of injustice that are captured by climate justice. The first is that climate change disproportionately and much earlier affected the poorest communities, the small island states, the indigenous peoples, even in richer countries, poorer communities. And when you think about it, that's the black and brown and indigenous people in our world. So it's actually also a racial injustice. Secondly, within that, there's the gender injustice, that women have different roles in society, different lack of power. Women often have lack of access to credit, may not have land rights, for example, and yet have to put food on the table, have to make their communities resilient, and they do. The third injustice, happily I don't have to say too much about anymore, because young people have reminded us, the intergenerational injustice. The fourth injustice is a subtle one, but it's increasingly important today, and was at COP27, which I've just come from, like I hope a number of you. It's the injustice of the different pathways to development of different regions of the world. Industrialized countries, we built our economies on fossil fuel. So our responsibility is to acknowledge that we owe it to the workers in coal, oil, and gas, but that now we need a just transition, just for them, and just for their communities, and just for society, out of fossil fuel, which is not easy, into clean energy. And we're not doing that fast enough. And then developing countries, I remember, because I was the special envoy at the time of the Paris Climate Agreement, the special envoy of the Secretary General of the UN, every country had to do its nationally determined contribution. And this was new. All countries, large and small, developed, developing, whatever. And developing countries, by and large, said, we want to go green, clean energy as quickly as possible. But we will need the investment, we'll need the training, we'll need the transfer of technology, the skills, maybe the intellectual property, and none of that happened after Paris. It just didn't happen. And now, you know, at this stage, developing countries are saying, countries in Africa, for example, look, we have gas, we have coal. Why should we not use it the way you used it to build up your economy? And of course, if they did, they would be affected earlier, but the whole world would be affected because it would use up this carbon budget that we talk about now. So that's the injustice, and that was very evident at COP27, that kind of sense of anger and unfairness that, you know, I mean, if only the rich countries had got out of energy faster and helped the poorer countries to get into clean energy faster, we'd be in a much better place. And that's an injustice in itself. And then the fifth injustice, of course, is the injustice of nature. And we increasingly see that. We're about to have COP15 in Montreal under Chinese presidency about loss of biodiversity, extinction of species. And that is hugely important, and that COP is not getting the attention it should be getting. And I'm glad there were some very good talks about the need to restore biological diversity here at this forum.
So the justice issues are really around recognizing that those who are least responsible are the most affected.
And earlier, much earlier. I mean, I was President of Ireland from 1990 to 1997. I never made a speech about climate. I made a speech about the environment, but not climate, because we didn't know. We weren't really aware. There were some who were aware, very aware, but I wasn't one of them. And even when I was High Commissioner, there was another part of the UN dealing with it. I was in a silo, big silo of human rights and gender equality, etc. But it wasn't until I started working in Africa on human rights that I became aware and met my heroes, not all Africans, from all over the world, that I wrote about in that book.
So when you were elected president of Ireland, one of the quotes that I love is you said, "I was elected by the women of Ireland who, instead of rocking the cradle, rock the system." And that's really about women recognizing their power and choosing to use it to make change in ways that they want to make change. So the part of your, the title of your book is A Man-Made Problem with a Feminist Solution, which is about women claiming power and making the change. What should women be doing now?
Well, you know, when things get really, really bad, women have to step up. Isn't that right? Always step up and solve the problem, find the solution. That's where we are now. You know, COP27 showed us a complete paradox. I came out of it, my head spinning. On the one side, there was so much good work on innovation, clean energy, resilience building, coalitions for this, coalitions for that, dealing with methane, all this sort of positive stuff. And we were on the cusp of a clean energy world. But actually, we're heading for disaster. We're heading for a 2.4 degree world if everybody, every country, and every company did what they've promised to do, all the commitments. We're still heading for a 2.4 degree world because the commitments aren't enough at all. So, you know, it's that strange thing. So what is needed is to call out those who aren't doing what they should be doing and push more and make more visible this world that we're literally on the cusp of. We're on the verge of. We just have to get over the hump into that clean world, and clean energy world. And we need to talk about it more because it's going to be a very different world. Take the continent where we had the COP. 600 million people in Africa never switched the switch for electricity. They could have distributed electricity. They can have all kinds of mini systems. It's almost there. It needs more focus and priority and attention, and you could change people's lives dramatically. 900 million still cook on dirty cooking and die from inhaling the smoke, and their babies that are on their back or around them also die in very large numbers. About 5 million people a year die from that inhalation, which is more than COVID you know, has caused in a year. So, you know, cities would be so wonderful to live in. They'd be green with pathways. The air would be like it was at the very start of COVID when we didn't have these fossil fuel vehicles driving around. And the birds would be singing. We'd be closer to nature. There's so much to get excited about in that cusp that we're just very nearly getting to and over. And yet, the drag of prolonging fossil fuel beyond, and there are people who are going to make billions by doing that, and they were there in the COP in Egypt, more than 600 representatives of the fossil fuel lobby at a conference on climate, at a conference on how do we move forward out of what's harming us. We spend $1.8 trillion a year on harmful subsidies, mainly to the fossil fuel industry. Can you believe it? You know, it's a very strange disconnect from where we need to be. And I think women are absolutely key to solving that.
So it feels like such a big problem. And so what can we, I mean, I recycle, I separate my trash, and what else can I be doing? What is the action that we can individually take
Yeah.
besides separating our trash and, you know, all of that? What is it that I can do, that we can do as individuals? So talk to us about the Dandelion Project.
Well, I was with a network that I belong to called Connected Women Leaders in April. And we realized that the problem is getting very serious. We're not on course for a safe world, even though there's a lot of good things happening. And we decided, and I was particularly speaking about this, that we needed a moonshot approach. We realized we were up, it's the 60th anniversary, I think, of Kennedy saying that he would put a man on the moon, that America would put a man on the moon. It was impossible. And then it happened in 8 years. And I think the average age in NASA, which had to be invented at the time, was 26. So it was young people who did this. And as I was speaking about it, I was actually getting pushback from my fellow women leaders. You know, well, yeah, but moonshot, technical, competitive with Russia, which was what it was all about, because they had their Sputnik, etc. And they said, what's the feminist version? So I had to go back to the drawing board and think about that. And what we came up with is what we call Project Dandelion. The dandelion is the only flower/weed that grows on all 7 continents. It's very resilient. You can't get rid of the damn thing if you try. Thirdly, poets write about it a lot. And how do you, oh yes, and it's used in soups and teas in certain countries, and salads. And how do you spread it? And what we've decided to do is create this light touch platform that takes in all of the things you've been talking about at this conference that relate to climate, literally all of them. All the positive things, the challenge that Sandrine posed this morning. I totally want to build on what she was saying about the urgency of now. We need to reform the international monetary system. Do you know who's beginning the reform of the international monetary system? 3 women. Mia Mottley, the Prime Minister of Barbados, with her Bridgetown initiative that I hope a number of you have studied. It's a very good call for reform. Secondly, Janet Yellen of the Fed. And thirdly, Kristalina Georgieva of the International Monetary Fund. They're all realizing it's possible, and it should happen, that the World Bank and the IMF and other multinational banks provide far more into support in the international system for developing countries, for moving out of fossil fuel into clean energy. And that will bring down the interest rates, and the private sector will come in. And so there's sort of a moment that's happening that we need to really get on top of, that is about how do we, do the impossible, which is move this curve, get away from heading to a world of 2.4 degrees of warming. And I mean, people wonder when you say, all this talk about 1.5 degrees. It was because of a climate justice pressure at the Paris Agreement that we got the 1.5 into the agreement. The goal in Paris was to stay well below 2 degrees of warming above pre-industrial standards and work for 1.5. Really, really important. The scientists then studied it and came out with a report in 2018, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And they said there is a huge difference between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees of global warming. In that time, between 1.5 and 2 degrees, probably the coral reefs will disappear, the Arctic ice will disappear, and the permafrost, and there's a lot of permafrost around the Arctic and in the Russian Federation, etc., Siberia and all that, it will melt and throw up not just carbon, but methane, which is even more lethal in the shorter term. So we want to avoid those tipping points. And people are kind of saying, what's all this about 1.5, etc. Actually, 1.5 is the outer limit of a livable world. and we need to kind of realize that. If we go above that limit, we'll have to capture carbon and come down as quickly as possible. So it's that contradiction that women have to realize. What can anybody do? I always say every individual can do three things. You can make the climate crisis personal in your life, which you've obviously done. You were talking about recycling. And then you get kind of, you know, you're on top of your responsibility. Yeah. Secondly, get angry with those who aren't doing enough. And it needs anger now because we are heading for catastrophe. That's where we're heading in this century. So, you know, anybody sort of under 70 will feel the worst effects of it. Elders like myself will probably die out before it gets to its really worst, but who's happy about that? Anyway, so you know, I'm trying to kind of emphasize the urgency and the seriousness of it without frightening people, because I don't believe that, you know, fear-mongering is going to get us there. Right. I think hope is going to get us there, and determination. And it's the determination to imagine this world quickly that we must be hurrying towards. If we're not imagining and wanting it, we're not hurrying towards it as we should be. Mm-hmm. So we need this clean energy world. A huge amount is happening. It's, as I said, we're on the cusp. It's almost there. It needs a movement that is women-led, but obviously not women only, by any manner it means. Women-led, and brings in the young climate activists who are already there. The business, the progressive business, which is as serious about climate as I am. I'm a member of the B team of business leaders, and they talk about it in exactly this way, that we really have to bend that curve quickly and come back to going towards this clean energy world that's just around the corner.
Well, thank you, Madam President, for this lesson on climate change and what we can do. Make it personal, get angry with those who aren't doing enough, and take action.
Imagine this world.
Imagine this world. The book is in the bookstore. Go buy you a copy. I already started reading. I'm halfway through. Thank you, Madam President. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today. Congratulations. Well done. Thank you. Thank you so much.